When discussing the relationship between the United States and France after the Revolutionary War to the Articles of Confederation, you really can't start anywhere else except with France's enormous amount of debt at the time. They spent $1 billion of its currency, which in today's U.S. currency would equal $4 billion to aid the United States during the Revolutionary War, which doubled their national debt. So obviously a gigantic hit on their national debt. And even before this, they started with Comptroller General of Finance's Turgot, who simply had no idea what he was doing, and then was replaced by Jacques Necker, who also had no idea what he was doing, and tried taking loans to pay off the national debt, which just doesn't work. And the only person during this time who was high up in the ranks in France who actually knew what he was doing to solve the problem was Charles Alexandre de Calonne, who tried fixing the problem by raising taxes on the wealthy, but was exiled for these extreme ideas. As Jonathan McGringle so eloquently described, was France put so much money into the United States and added so much to their debt. And why did they do this? They didn't spend $4 billion for more land in North America. They spent it to become the United States' main trading partner, and weaken Britain, France's greatest enemy. And instead, Britain immediately became the United States' main trading partner, which, in the eyes of the French, was a slap in the face. So clearly, the initial relationship between the United States and France was very strained. As Matthew McGregor so well mentioned, the initial relationship between the French and the United States was very bad, and this all led to France's lowest point in its history, the French Revolution, in 1789. And King Louis XVI, who lacked the thick skin and general leadership skills to be a good king, was easily influenced when met with an opposition, and overall led to his beheading. And after the French Revolution was all said and done, Napoleon Bonaparte became the leader of France, and Napoleon's opinion of the United States over time became very clear, and had plans to invade the United States after selling them land in the Louisiana Purchase.
In order to best understand the British-American relationship after the Revolutionary War, it's important to compare and contrast to the most important treaties conducted under the Articles of Confederation. The first treaty, of course, was the Treaty of Paris of 1783, not to be confused with the Treaty of Paris of 1763, which ended the French and Indian War. So let me just briefly sum up what the main articles of the treaty included. Number 1, the United States was recognized as an independent nation. Number 2, the boundaries of the United States were set from the Great Lakes in the north to Florida in the south, and from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River. The rest of the land could not really be accounted for because of the occupation of the Spanish natives, who would have to be settled with other negotiations. Number 3, certain fishing rights in the Atlantic would have to be specified for the American fishermen. Of course, later this became highly debatable and contestable with many other European nations who wanted in the catch. Number 4, debts incurred during the war would have to be repaid by both sides accordingly. Number 5, rights and properties, the Loyalists were to be returned. And number 6, most importantly of all, the British troops had to get out. But as we will later see, the growing tensions between the Americans and the British in the Treaty of Paris is not entirely upheld by either sides. To this day, the only article of the treaty that has not been breached is its recognition of the U.S. as a nation. In between the signing of the Treaty of Paris and the Jay Treaty in 1794, tensions between the Americans and the British ran high, almost to the point of war. Many of the clauses of the Treaty of Paris were ignored. Militaristically, the British did not evacuate all of the troops in the Northwest Territory of the United States, as they had promised. Furthermore, the Americans were upset that the British Navy rescinded all of its protection of the American merchant ships now that the states were no longer colonies. In 1793, France and Britain went to war. Now this is a huge deal because the Americans were indebted to the French after owing them tons and tons of money from the American Revolution. Although claiming to be neutral, the Americans were stuck in a very situation as both the French and the British wanted to trade with American merchants. Specifically, the British actually attacked neutral American merchant ships, taking their cargo and their sailors to be used in the British forces. In order to solve the growing tensions in 1794, Supreme Court Chief Justice John Jay was dispatched to seek solutions. He came up with Jay's Treaty. Key provisions of the treaty included withdrawal of American soldiers from posts in the American West, settlement of border issues between Americans and Canada, the resolution of American and Loyalist losses, ships, etc. during the war, and generally it was really a treaty to regulate commerce and navigation between the US and Britain. In these negotiations, the British really had much of the power. What leverage did the new American government really have, considering they did not have a strong army and they did not have a strong unified naval force? Jay's Treaty resulted in a 10-year peace period between the Americans and the British, but in the end, the British really conceded to very little. Big might say that Jay's Treaty did not do very much for the Americans. But for the lack of international leverage the new American government had, the treaty successfully aided the growth of American economy. Economically, the fishing rights of the Americans were contested by European nations. American ships and cargo were pirated by other nations, especially Britain, now that the ships were no longer under the aegis of Great Britain. The British Navy commandeered ships and cargo to supplement its war with France, and American sailors were forced into British service. And perhaps most damaging to the new American economy was that the British set up regulations to impede the growth of the American economy. American merchants were no longer able to trade in the Caribbean or with other British imperial ports. Britain imposed high duties, which limited American exports, although British exports to the U.S. continued to prosper. And under the Articles of Confederation, internally the states had problems upholding the promises made in the treaty. Because of the weak central government, not all states listened to the federal recommendation to return all Tory properties. Slaves who had been freed by the British during the war were not all returned to the slave owners. In addition, American citizens were constantly frustrated by clashes with Spanish and Native American claims on the land. It has been rumored that at least some of the Native American clashes were partially incited by the British.
The Articles of Confederation was ratified in 1781 by the Second Continental Congress. It acted as the first framework for how the central and state governments would operate. The delegates feared a powerful central government like Britain and decided to give the states near full autonomy. The decision turned out to be a huge mistake, though. The federal government had full power over foreign affairs, the ability to wage war and declare peace. They could also decide disputes between the states. They had all this power, but couldn't enforce any resolutions or levy any taxes without the state's consent. It was impossible to conduct any foreign policy, and the national defense suffered acutely. Debts just couldn't be paid off because the states wouldn't give any money. This was a crucial issue because as long as they struggled with freeing themselves of their debt, they would also have to deal with problems like Shays' Rebellion. As a result, everything was declining. The army nearly starved in several winters of the Revolution. The army lacked the needed funding and supplies from states that it didn't receive and nearly fell apart as a result. As historian Bruce Chadwick wrote, winters of the war because of the weaknesses of the Continental Congress. The delegates could not draft soldiers and had to send requests for regular troops and militia to the states. Congress had the right to order the production and purchase of provisions for the soldiers, but could not force anyone to supply them, and the army nearly starved in several winters of war. As a result, Congress printed money to make up for the lack of taxes collected. This led to money that was so depreciated, many people didn't even call it currency. The governors asked for $2 million in 1783, and less than $1.5 million came into the treasury between 1781 and 1784.